I get a lot of people asking me to debunk pro-Palestinian arguments, so in the next few weeks I will be exposing the lies contained in some anti-Israel videos, but I also want to provide you with some tools to debunk the basic pro-Palestinian arguments yourselves. Your most important tools will be a bit of history and some important values. If you don't know too much about history, don't worry, I won't be mentioning too many dates and numbers that you need to remember. Let's start with the history. The four most common anti-Israel arguments are: the Zionist movement is a European colonialist movement, the Jews stole land from the local Palestinians in 1948, Israel keeps on stealing land by building settlements, Israel kills way too many civilians. Is Zionism a European colonial movement? No. First of all, there was never a Jewish empire in Europe. Jews were a persecuted minority in almost all European countries. And second, most of the Jews in Israel today, and most of the Jews in Israel 70 years ago, and most of the Jews in Israel 150 years ago came from Muslim countries. Jews from Europe and from Muslim countries have carried on migrating, or as we say in Hebrew, going up to Israel for centuries. Why? Because Israel and Jerusalem are the holiest places for Jews, just as the Muslims have Mecca and Medina as their holiest places, so the Jews have Jerusalem and the land of Israel. So what is Zionism? A nationalist movement. Around the time of World War I, many empires collapsed: the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire, the Russian Empire, and a generation later, the British and the French empires all fell apart, and the idea of nation-state spread. This was the point at which many nationalist movements were on the rise, and the Zionist movement was and is the national movement of the Jews. Let's go on to the next argument. Did the Jews steal land from the local Palestinians in 1948? No, and this is an easy one. Can you name a single Jewish settlement that was built on stolen Muslim land before November 1947? No, you can't, because there isn't a single case of Jews stealing land from Muslims. In November 1947, the UN suggested dividing the land into two countries, one for the Jews and one for the Arabs. The Arabs said no and started a war to eradicate Israel. And during that war, they lost some land. This is what happens when you start a war. You might lose. This is a crucial point. All those pro-Palestinians who are in support of a two-state solution, tell them that it has been on the table multiple times, in 1937 and 47, in 1993, and again in 2008. Each time the Arabs said no. The Palestinians don't want a state next to Israel. They want a state instead of Israel. Now, the more advanced pro-Palestinians will say that the Jews ended up getting more land even though there were fewer of them, and this is the reason why the Arabs rejected the UN partition plan of 1947. My answer to that claim can be found in a video I will post a link to below. It's a video about the Nakba. YouTube actually shadow banned it, so there is a good chance that you missed it. I will add two extra points here. First, there were cases of Arabs stealing land from the Jews before 1947. In Gaza and in Hebron, there were Jewish families who had been living there for generations. And in 1929, during the anti-Jewish riots, the Jews had to run for their lives and the Muslims took over Jewish property. And second, there was no such a thing as a Palestinian people back then. This all happened under the Ottoman Empire. Millions of pilgrims have visited the land of Israel over the last 3,000 years, and not once did any pilgrim meet a Palestinian. The Palestinian people were properly invented or created around the 1960s. It is actually started in the 20s, but only in the 1960s did they really started to see themselves as a people. Until then, they saw themselves and they were seen by others as Arabs or Muslims. I don't want you to just take my word for it, so take a look at any newspaper dating from the 1930s and see for yourself that no one was writing about the Palestinians. Now, all people should have the right to identify themselves however they choose, but you can't reinvent history. Does Israel keep on stealing Palestinian land by building settlements? The settlements are a complicated issue. I am personally against settlements built on private Palestinian land, but when it comes to Jerusalem or Hebron, where Jews lived for hundreds of years until 1929, when they were violently displaced by the Muslims, I do believe that Israelis have the right to live there. And besides, if you are in favor of multicultural societies, why can Arabs live in Israel, but Jews cannot live in the West Bank? If people start talking to you about these settlements, tell them that these settlements have nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the war with Hamas just goes to show it. In 2005, Israel withdrew from all the settlements in Gaza. Since 2005, Gaza has been a Jew-free area. In other words, the people of Gaza have had 18 years to show the world that without these settlements and the Israeli army, they are able to flourish. But instead, they have been building rockets and tunnels and hate. By the way, again, don't just take my word for it. The Palestinians themselves say the same thing. Their leaders and their constitution say nothing about the settlements. It is all about destroying Israel and the Islamization of the Middle East and the world. Don't blame Israel for Hamas wanting to Muslimize the world. What about the claim that more Palestinian civilians are dying in the conflict than Israeli civilians? Now, this is a hard one because the numbers are coming from Hamas. If Israel says that 4 Israelis were killed, then it means that 4 Israelis were killed. Israel will not say that 10 civilians were killed if it is not true, just to get sympathy in the media. With Hamas, it is, how can I put this mildly? It is different. Hamas will put people in body bags to make it look as if there are more dead people. They will put ketchup on little girls so they have some good photos. Sadly, some media outlets rush to publish the numbers put out by Hamas, as 20 dead will get more clicks than 5 dead. And if they can get the word children in the headline, then it is even better. Another factor to consider is that many of the Hamas terrorists are 16 or 17 years old. If you look at the number of real children, those who are under 15, then the numbers drop significantly. And Hamas fire rockets from hospitals and schools and uses children as human shields. To that, you need to add that Hamas fires at its own people and then blames Israel for it. Israeli soldiers never aim at Palestinian children. When Hamas and their jihadist friends decide to fire rockets from a school and place children next to their rocket launchers, then the blood of those children is on the hands of Hamas. Pro-Palestinians don't have a lot of good arguments at their disposal, so they hold on very tightly to this argument about women and children dying. You can see the rage in their eyes when they talk about it. When you see this hate in the eyes of pro-Palestinian when they are talking about Israel, then this is the time to zoom out and ask them why they care so much about the Palestinians, but don't care about the 500,000 people who died in Syria. What is it about Israel that makes them so furious? At this point, they might say that 2 wrongs don't make it right, and I agree. But this selective outrage is rather strange. When 500,000 are killed in Syria by Assad and his Iranian and Russian friends, and hundreds of thousands of people are killed in the war in Yemen, children are starving there. And somehow, there are no demonstrations for them, and no one really cares. Then it is hard not to draw the conclusion that maybe it is not really about the Palestinians, maybe it is rooted in hatred for Israel. Pro-Palestinians use bombastic words when they attack Israel: genocide, ethnic cleansing, occupation, colonialism. Beside the fact that none of it is true, the most important fact is also ignored, and that is that in terms of the number of casualties, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the smallest conflicts in the world. It certainly gets the most media coverage, but the real atrocities are happening in Muslim countries. I often get comments and questions about small incidents. Here is an example. Pro-Palestinians accuse Israel of carrying out a massacre in Tantura. Was there a massacre in the village of Tantura in 1948? The answer is no, there was no massacre. The story of Tantura is based on a MA that a student wrote, which was rejected by the university, but the Palestinians keep using it. I'm not claiming, however, that the Jews are all saints. I'm not claiming that no Jew has ever done anything wrong, but for every event there might have been which saw Jews intentionally killing Arab civilians, I can give you 100 incidents where Palestinians intentionally killed Jews before and after 1948, before and after 1967, after the Oslo Accords, and after Israel withdrew from Gaza. But if you're from Wisconsin or Berlin or London or Paris, there is no point talking about what did or didn't happen on the night of 9th of April 1948 in a small village near Jerusalem. First of all, zoom out. And second, talk about values. If you zoom out, the picture is very clear. Muslim countries, almost all of them, are not democratic. They have no freedom of speech and poor human rights records. Just try to criticize Islam in Muslim countries. You don't even have to go that far. Just say that you don't believe in God and all religions are nonsense. Please try it. There is much more violence against women, against minorities, and against the LGBTQ community in Muslim countries compared to Western society. Why is that, if it is not because of different values? And which of these two sets of values do you then choose to sympathize with? So what does all this have to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you might ask? If the Middle East was a peaceful place and there was only tension between Israel and its neighbors, I would say, you know what? You might be right. Maybe Israel is the bully. But if there are wars and conflicts and violence and massive human rights violation in all of the Muslim countries in the Middle East, maybe none of this is Israel's fault. And it is not only in Israel or the Middle East. Look at Europe. Just choose a city: London, Paris, Rotterdam, Brussels, Malmo, Berlin, any city. Where does the most violence occur? In the Jewish communities or in the Muslim communities? If you don't like what I'm saying, please don't just call me racist. Instead, prove me wrong, and I'm telling you, I will listen to you. Write to me in the comments, hey, I live in Stockholm or Amsterdam, and in my city, it is actually the Jewish communities that are more violent than the Muslim ones. Unfortunately, it is a fact that Muslim society, be it the Palestinians, the Syrians, the Yemenites, the Iraqis, the Iranians, the Muslim communities in Europe, hasn't yet managed to create peace and democracy and foster acceptance of minorities. It is a huge shame for the people living there, no doubt about that. However, to blame Israel or the US or the Jews or the West or all of them together simply doesn't make sense. Could it be that the problem is the values held by Muslim society? The media coverage of the conflict is crazy. It is 24/7, and they talk so much but say so little. This war is not about Gaza or the occupation or a Palestinian state. It is about values. Today it is Israel, tomorrow it is the UK and Germany. I encourage you to speak up for the values of the West and not to ever apologize for it. Before I conclude this video, I want to bring up one last important point. Don't waste your time arguing with stupid people. If you are talking to someone intelligent who has some valid points to make and is open to listening, great. But remember, there is no point in getting angry and wasting your valuable time with the dumb ones. I like to say to them, you are so right. If you are such a great supporter of Palestine and you hate the white, colonialist, privileged West so much, then put your money where your mouth is and join your Muslim brothers for some fun in Syria or Libya or Iraq or Iran. go and have some